All right, so here's part 3 of the Lab 5 presentation. This is basically just an overview of what's expected of you during the actual lab exercise. So this lab, a 30-part lab, individual lab as they generally are, you'll submit to Canvas 4 files, a Word document that has a summary of your answers to some of the questions that will come up, and then the 3 of these DOE files, which are the files that store the models that you construct in Arena. If you're doing this lab in the lab when the TAs are available, then I would recommend your goal should be is to try to get to this, at least this modified part here. So we'll get to what this is in a second, but this 0301 modified DOE model to get to the point where that model is constructed and you can pause the model while it's running and confirm that your rework inspections with priority redrilling are actually working. And so if you can do that, then you're probably in pretty good shape for this lab. But if you can't, then you should take advantage of the TAs that are available. So if you're doing this in lab, that's my goal for you for the actual in-lab experience. All right, so the first part, this is a book example. So if you go to section 3.4, you'll build a basic single channel queuing system like the one that you see here, where a part arrives into the system. It goes through a drilling center in this case. So this is just a general process or a server. So it's got a queue, so when the drill is being used, then other parts that arrive have to queue up. And then when they're done with this service, when they're done in the drilling center, then they can leave the system, which frees up the resource for another part to come in and go through service. So basically go into section 3.4 of your book and follow the instructions there to build this simple system. Save that model as 0301.doe, which will be something that you'll upload with your model. When you run it, you should be able to use those reports and to go into the special sections of those reports on, say, the queuing section, and be able to report the average waiting time at the drilling center. So that's kind of a process stat, or the average queue length at the drilling center. So those are two things that if you read through this exercise in section 3.4, they'll go into details on how to do, or you can explore those reports to find those things in there as well. You'll want to do that for 20 simulated minutes, and for other details, again, look at section 3.4 in your book. This is sort of pretty basic exercise. Once you have that built, then I want you to modify your model to include an inspection process with a capacity for one part at a time. And so this is the kind of modified model that's up here. So you go through the drilling center as before, but we're adding this inspection process. This is going to have a new resource in it. So it's not the same resource as the one that was used here. That new resource has a capacity of 1, and each part that goes through it uses that whole resource when it goes through it. And then you're going to add a decide block, and that decide block is going to be such that 75% of these inspections pass, and they leave the system the same way they used to. But the other 25% is going to go through this priority rescreening block. Now notice this is just an assign module. So that says down here, use an assign module to ensure that these parts, and so inside that assign module, I want you to change the color of the parts as they go through to indicate that they are going through this rework cycle. And I want you to generate or use a priority custom attribute so that these ones have a higher priority when they come through the drilling center. In other words, they go to the head of the line. So the way you'll do that is you'll go to that queue data module in Arena, and in the queue data module, you should be able to find the drilling center queue. And in the drilling center queue, one of the options that you'll be able to change there is the type. And you can change the type to prioritize these parts. And then it'll say, well, how do you want to prioritize it? And you can select, for example, lowest attribute value, and then it'll say, what attribute do you want? And you can select the attribute that you have selected here. So basically what we're saying is there's going to be an attribute that you're going to introduce, let's say a priority attribute, and let's say you can make its default value in the attributes data value, say 0. Then when they go through priority rescreening, you can assign that attribute, say, -1. And then if this drilling center queue is configured so that it takes the lowest attribute value, then any parts that have the -1 will get moved to the head of the line and be processed first. Save that DOE model as 0301 modified DOE, so that'll be uploaded as well. Run it for 20 simulated minutes, just like the previous one, and then analyze again the average waiting time and queue length. So I want you to report those, and then I'd like you to compare these stats to the previous version and comment on the results. So basically, this is nearly identical to the previous process, but there is this added inspection here, and notice inspection takes a constant 4.5 minutes, and there is this rework here. And so I'd like you to, I'm basically asking you to see what are the quantifiable impacts of adding this inspection process and this rescreening process to all of the parts and their stats in terms of average waiting time and queue length. All right, and then the last part of this lab, and so like I mentioned, the goal while in lab. So you know you're in good shape if you can pause that simulation as you're going, and then when you pause it, you'll be able to you'll see these parts queuing up, and as we sort of demonstrated in the guided tutorial, you'll be able to drill down into those. And if you drill down into those, you can confirm that the priority is being set as you'd like. So using the pause, can you debug your simulation to make sure that parts that fail inspection are going back to the drilling system and are receiving prioritized service? So that's not something I'm asking you specifically to do in your Word doc or anything like that, but as a diagnostic on how much you're following things, see if you're able to do that. If you feel like you're able to do that, pause it and confirm this for yourself, then you're in pretty good shape with this arena stuff so far. All right, then moving on to part 3, we're going to change the manufacturing and test system from the guided tutorial. Now, if you skip that video, you can either go back and watch that video and build that with me, or you can go to section 4.1 of your text and you can build the model 4.1. You can go through that process to build that manufacturing and test system, which looks a little like the one back here. And again, earlier in these slides, you can also see details about that. So you can try to also follow through the slides and build it through that way. So what you're going to do in this section is to take the manufacturing and test system that we already built, and then go into these two, what they're listed as processes here, but these are the two prep processes, Prep A and Prep B. And before, they had their own independent Prep A resource and Prep B resource. I want you to change them to use the same resource for both. So everything else stays the same creates and everything else, but now instead of having an independent resource for Prep A and Prep B, now there's just a single prep resource that they both have to use. Run that model and see what differences do you notice relative to the old model where they had separate resources. Now, if you're using the student version of Arena, which many of you will, then you may notice that you'll get an error before the model finally ends. That error is not unexpected. Read the error, think about some of the other stuff that I've mentioned in this introduction, and then go ahead and comment on why you received that error. So basically, if you used the non-student version, you may actually be able to complete this, in which case I want you to use the stats that came out of the report to compare what happens when they use one shared resource versus the two separate resources in the previous case. But if you're using the student version and you get that error, then I want you to tell me what that error tells you about the performance of this system. So, what is it saying about what's going on in the system which causes you to get that error? Either way, save your model as 0401 modified DOE, and that'll be the third model that you upload with your submission. So what's due on this is in your Word document, this Lab 5 docx, we need to see snapshots of all three ARENA models, however you'd like to do that, with a screen grab or with copy and paste from ARENA or however you'd like it. I'd like to see the average waiting time and average queue length for both of those 0301 queuing models and a comparison of those results. In both cases, you need to make sure you're using a 20-minute simulation time so that you're sort of comparing apples to apples. And then I'd like to see a discussion of the observed differences in the original manufacturing model from the guided tutorial and the manufacturing model when you have them use the same shared resource for that Prep A and Prep B process. So, all in all, you'll upload that Lab 5 docx with all of that in it, and you'll upload these three model files. Now, due to technical limitations in Canvas, it's actually, when you start using figures in your doc files, it makes grading much easier if you also include the lab5.pdf, which you can export from Microsoft Word as an alternative. So we still need to see the docx, because there's other processes in Canvas that need the docx, but it just turns out that when grading, having the PDF actually makes it much cleaner, because when you preview the docx as a grader, very often when there are figures involved, then Canvas will either truncate the figures, or if a figure happens to be close to a page boundary, it'll get rid of the other page. It's really quite ugly, and the TAs end up having to download your doc files, or if they don't notice that it's a problem with how Canvas renders, they just assume that you left things out and then grade you improperly for that. So that's just an unfortunate side effect of switching to Canvas, and that's why, just to be safe, it's better to try uploading both the docx and the PDF. We really would appreciate that, but I'm only requiring the docx and those three other model files. That's all we have. So, good luck with the lab.